Have you ever had a burden that runs so deep inside of you that it takes over your entire being? I'm not talking about things like the burden of having to do the dishes or getting up early to go to work every day, but rather I'm talking about a deep-seated passion that starts in your heart and begins to permeate all that you think about, all that you do, all that you are. I'm talking about the kind of burden that you'll never be able to shake off until you do something about it. I'm Trey Sansom, and I have a burden for people who are disconnected from Christ. It encompasses my entire being. It's what I think about when I wake up, and it's what I think about when I go to bed. You see, I remember the chains that I was in before I became a Christian, and I experienced the freedom that I found in Jesus every single day. And I want everyone to experience that same freedom. And that's why I have this burden for disconnected people. And this burden, it's taken me right up to the edge of a cliff. Just like Indiana Jones, where the only way forward is to step out in faith. Quit the job that I love, sell my home, move my family to St. Louis, and enroll in seminary so that I can eventually plant a church that reaches out to disconnected people. And all the while, I have to trust God that He will be there to hold me up and provide all the means to do it. Some people might say that sounds more like a leap of faith. But for me to get to this point, it's been less of a leap of faith and more like a series of steps out in faith. You might be thinking, why plant a church? Well, a few years ago, I started working as the worship leader for a church plant called The Point. The Point meets in a movie theater, and they have a mission of connecting the disconnected to a growing and reproducing relationship with Jesus Christ. It's a perfect fit for me because that's where my heart is. It's a place where people can come as they are and experience how much God really loves them right where they are, not where we want them to be. And I've seen God change at least 100 people's lives since I've been at The Point. Now, you would think that experience would lessen my burden. It would ease it a little bit. But instead of easing my burden, it grew stronger and stronger. And then I saw a study. I saw a study by Kirk Hathaway and Penny Marler, and this study indicates that 79.6% of people in the U.S. are disconnected from church. That means that nearly 8 out of 10 people, 8 out of 10 of my neighbors, 8 out of 10 of my friends don't know Jesus. To put it into perspective, the U.S. has a population of 320 million people. That means that 254,720,000 people are disconnected from Christ. That number makes the 100 lives that I've seen changed at The Point look minuscule in comparison. So my burden was growing stronger and stronger by the day. And so through the prompting of my pastor and the Holy Spirit and a ton of prayer, I decided to take my first step out in faith. And I decided that I would pursue church planting. I felt like God was calling me to plant a church because I believe that the world needs more places that reach out to disconnected people. But the thing is, I tried to do it on my own terms instead of on God's terms. And as you'll find out, I'm a little slow in this area. But as I was going forward with this, I had so many pastors and so many church leaders who were telling me that I needed to go to seminary in St. Louis. The problem was that seminary takes 4 years. And I dropped out of college years ago to pursue a career in rock and roll. But that's another story for another day. But before I could even go to seminary, I'd have to get my bachelor's degree. So that means that it would be 8 years before I could even get started. And the thing is, I'm staring 40 right in the face. I'm not getting any younger. So I explored every other conceivable option to plant a church without having to go to St. Louis. But every single one of those doors was shut in my face, hard. I was getting frustrated. I was starting to wonder, why had I even taken that first step? But looking back, every time that I felt like God might have been letting me down, He was actually really holding me up. And He was steering me in the direction that I was really supposed to go. I just couldn't see it. You see, that's the thing about faith. According to the Bible, faith is the confidence that we have hope for what will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things that we cannot see. It's kind of like Indiana Jones looking over the edge of that cliff, knowing that he has to get to the other side. He couldn't see the bridge that would eventually get him there, but he had to have enough faith to step out and confidence that somehow he wouldn't fall to his death. You see, Indy realized that the only way for him to move forward was to step out in faith. Now, with my plans for planting a church on my own terms not panning out, once again, I felt like I was looking over the edge of a cliff. I still wasn't convinced that I needed to move to St. Louis, but I did realize that I'm not getting any younger and that the only way to move forward was to step out in faith. Again. So I enrolled in Bethel University. That's why I'm here now. I didn't know what would come of it. I didn't even know how I was going to pay for it. But the thing is, God has been more than faithful. I just had to step out and trust that He would provide all that I need. And He really has. God provided enough funding to pay for school, and I even get a nice little reimbursement check in the mail every semester. But that still didn't answer the question. How would I become a church planter? Out of options, I decided to take a look at Concordia Seminary's website. And I noticed that they have an alternate route program where I can actually just receive a certificate rather than a master's degree. And that's not a problem because my goal is to plant a church, not get a degree. And instead of 4 years, it's only 2 years in St. Louis and then a 1-year internship at a church. So I thought, here's the solution. It wasn't my first choice since I'd have to move to St. Louis, but I figured I could rent my house out for a couple of years and then come back to the point to do my internship. So my wife and I prayed about it. We prayed really hard and we decided that we would take yet another step out in faith and go for it. So I sat down with my pastor and I told him about our plans, and I kid you not, it was literally the very next moment when another pastor walked in the room and announced that he had a big box of seminary textbooks if anybody wanted them. God instantly confirmed right there that I am finally moving in the direction that He wants me to go, and that God will provide what I need. And all that I have to do is step out where He wants me to go instead of where I want to go. And the thing is, I walked away with this stack of textbooks right here. That's over $1,000 worth of textbooks. See, God is already providing everything that I need. And then 2 weeks later, God showed up again. My pastor sat me down and he told me that our district had decided to pay for me to go full-time at the church, which we've been trying to get me to do for the last 3 years. And I was going to be able to go ahead and complete my church plant training program while I'm still getting ready to go to seminary. I mean, that was huge. And if the story ended there, it'd already be a great story about God's faithfulness when we step out in faith. But the truth is, it wasn't long before I found myself on the edge of another cliff. You see, I called the seminary admissions office, and they dropped a bombshell on me. I wasn't eligible for the alternate route program because I hadn't served in a Lutheran church for 10 years. I was devastated, to say the least. I was broken. So I called my pastor, completely convinced that the very last option that I had just disappeared. I felt like Peter when he stepped out onto the water. But when he saw the wind, he started to doubt. And so he began to sink. But the thing is that when Peter started to doubt, Jesus reached out His hand and helped Peter to get back into the boat. And as soon as they got back in the boat, that's when the wind stopped. Seeing my frustration, my pastor decided to call the admissions office to see if there's anything that they could do to help me. And when he called me back, he said, Trey, I have some good news and I have some bad news. The bad news is that there's absolutely no way to get around the 10-year stipulation for the alternate route. I didn't know what to say. I was like, where's the good news in that? But then he told me the good news. He told me that I can actually enroll in the master's program, even though I don't have a bachelor's degree, as long as I have 60 undergrad credits in very specific subjects. I was blown away. That's something that only God could do. Only God could provide a way to earn a master's degree without having a bachelor's degree. I mean, that's unheard of. That's when it was obvious to me that God had been steering the ship the whole time. And all that I had to do was step out in faith. And even when my faith started to waver, God was still faithful. He reached out his hand and he got me back into the boat. And he's provided more for me than I ever thought possible. But once again, I'm staring at the edge of a cliff. And the only way forward is to step out in faith again. You see, in less than a year, I'm actually going to quit the job that I love. I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to move my family to St. Louis. I'm going to enroll in seminary. I have no idea how I'm going to pay for it. But God has been faithful every time up until now. God has been faithful every time that I've stepped out in faith, even in my doubts. And so I'm confident that what I hope for will actually happen. And I trust that He will catch me before I fall. You see, sometimes the only way forward is to step out in faith. So what's your burden? What's your dream? What is it that runs so deep inside of you that it takes over your entire being? Think about it for a second. And then pray about it. And then pray about it some more. And then when the time comes, take a step out. Step out in faith, trusting that God will always be there, even when you don't see it, even when you doubt. But because God is always faithful. And sometimes the only way to move forward is to step out in faith.